Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. We're continuing our reading of this Roman miscellany book that I finished a while ago, and I wanted to share some of my favorite excerpts from it and also do a refresher of my mind of what I learned. This one was about Antony's defeat at Actium, and it's never ever excessive to learn many facts about ancient Rome. Let's begin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The 2nd of September 31st BC has long been a red letter day for connoisseurs of the world's decisive military encounters. For this was the date of the Battle of Actium, in which the man who was to be Rome's first emperor eliminated his last rival for absolute power, Mark Antony. I mean, just think about that. A battle that just echoes in time. That's just absolutely brutal. You know, you lose, and it's like literally remembered for a long time. Over 1,000 years, you know. Whew. Antony, well known as the greatest soldier of the age, shared government of the Roman world with the youthful Octavian. When their alliance broke down and civil war beckoned, it looked a fairly safe bet that Antony would come out on top. His best strategy was to invade Italy, but he labored under a great disadvantage. This was Cleopatra, Egypt's female pharaoh, with whom Antony was in league, sharing both her bed and her bank account. The most infamous couple. I read a book on them. And the HBO series that was done on Rome and how they portrayed Antony and Cleopatra was a bit bizarre, but I have noticed this way in which they paint Cleopatra as like an evil seductress who made Antony weird and whatnot. But it is quite fascinating that she was with two top men, you know. And she was of Greek descent, because Ptolemy was one of the main lieutenants or generals with Alexander the Great of Macedonia. So like there's like the Macedonian Greek element. So she was mixed race. She wasn't black like someone from Kenya or the Congo. And this has caused a lot of strife in history. But if she would have been that black, I think it would have been documented by the Romans, but she was more olive skin tone, or no darker than like a Mexican, you know. So it's fascinating how she's still being talked about to this day. Antony was in league, sharing her bank account. Like, it's getting that money. She insisted on joining Antony on campaign, and he gave way to her wishes. So she didn't want to be away from him. She wanted to be right around him. But she was very unpopular with the Roman public, and he knew that the legions would not follow him if he tried to lead them to Italy with her at his side. It's almost like that Game of Thrones scene with Jon and Dany, right? He was like, well, if the people of the north need to see us riding together. The Targaryens don't really have the best reputation. So, picking a woman who isn't loved by the people when you need the people, but you need her coin, is interesting, isn't it? It's a pickle. So, he had to think up a new approach. Rather than occupy all of Greece before sailing across the Adriatic Sea to the motherland, Antony decided to base his fleet and army at Actium, a sandy promontory on the west coast, leaving the north empty of his troops. He had hoped that this would tempt Octavian to transport his army to Greece without apparent risk. It was a trap, for Antony's plan was to blockade the enemy while keeping open his own supply lines to the Mediterranean and Egypt. At leisure, he would then proceed to fight the crucial battle with every prospect of victory. So notice this, supply lines. setting traps. It's fascinating just how they had their stratagems back then. Unfortunately, Octavian's brilliant Admiral Agrippa also knew something about traps. In a daring move, he sailed right down to the western seaboard of Greece, bypassing Actium and capturing fortress after fortress. All at once, the blockader was blockaded. Oh, can you imagine? Agrippa. With their fleet and army stuck at Actium, Antony and Cleopatra's supplies dwindled. The almost non-existent tides of the Mediterranean failed to wash away the excreta of many thousands of men, occupying a cramped space with a few facilities. Ew, so it's just like how many people were cramped and stuck in a small area does appear to give us a visual where it's just everyone going to the bathroom and the stagnation of the water really causing a problem. You can't fish from the same place you poop in. During the long hot summer months, an epidemic ravaged Antony's camp, perhaps dysentery or malaria. Men died and morale fell. Ooh. So not only is he blockaded, his supplies are dwindling, but the soldiers are beginning to drop like flies because of the filthiness around them, but also the different weather. Malaria comes from mosquitoes, if I'm right, and being endlessly poked by bugs must be absolutely brutal. And morale fell, yeah. When you are behind someone who's led you into a trap and they don't really have a way out, you're in trouble. Some deep trouble. Somehow Antony's ships had to storm their way to freedom. On a fine autumn day they sailed out, but the enemy blockaded held firm, and a sea battle commenced. Then, in a carefully planned maneuver, a small flotilla headed by Cleopatra's flagship slipped through a gap in the opposing line and headed for the open sea in Egypt. Antony immediately followed. His sailors could not believe that their commander had abandoned them, but once they realized he had, they surrendered. So a day or two later did the soldiers at Actium. Throughout the empire, support for the fugitive couple collapsed. Nobody appreciates betrayal. This was a lesson Antony and Cleopatra themselves learned the following year, when almost all their remaining friends made their excuses and left them to the humiliation and suicide in the grand palace at Alexandria. Whew. And later in the book he talks about that. But think about how she didn't stay and fight, right? It's very feminine. You think about it. She was like, I'm out of here. There's an opening. Bye, Antony. And she's outie. She wasn't like some warrior queen. Maybe that's why people didn't see her as trustworthy. Just the different Egyptian values compared to the Roman values. Not saying a Roman woman would have been different, but just that the paganism of Egypt and the paganism of ancient Rome is different, right? They're foreign. Egypt and Rome have a long history, but they are different, right? Their dress, their rituals, their military style. So Antony not picking a Roman woman, right, of one of the noble houses, and picking Cleopatra, who was previously said to have been with Caesar and is now going against Octavian, it's a problem. She's like the divider. Antony and Octavian were together. She comes in, it appears like she's a divider. Even if she wasn't, that's how it's looked at. And so her flagship going through the gap, navy warfare is pretty brutal back then. So they had to just imagine being in that ship and just, oh, let's get past. And then Antony, he sees it and he's like, I want to follow her. So he, chose to flee, and a desertion was a big no-no in the Roman military. In fact, crucifixion, a hybrid form of crucifixion, was done, death penalty for desertion. So those soldiers who had suffered with him, being trapped and, as they mentioned, blockaded, and an epidemic is dropping and the soldiers around them, he didn't go down with the ship. He chose to flee and follow a woman. A foreign woman. It's betrayal to the Roman code. But he had his reasons, and I wonder if we'll ever find out. You know, I would love... It would be so cool if, like... I always imagine if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us see history like that. It'd be cool. Watch it like a movie. Like, what was she thinking? What did she look like? What was he doing? What was he thinking? What were the soldiers thinking? Like, if you could just be like a shadow and go back in time and be there. Like, they can't see you, but you can see everything, and that would be really cool. That's one thing I'd like to see. But that's a very famous defeat. How fast you can fall. Think about that. What a sad way to go. Like Antony and Caesar at the height, peak of power. Antony lives, sees one of his closest friends get shanked on the Senate floor. Survives the assassination plots of those Brutus, Cato, and all of them. And then him and Octavius and Lepidus, right? Lucretius Lepidus? No, it was Lepidus, I think. Getting along, things are doing alright. Him and Octavian have a falling out. He joins Cleopatra. And then, next thing you know, he's being deserted by his allies, and he abandons his men, and their strange suicide. Crazy, isn't it? History is wild. That's why it's so cool to read the past. Just imagine if if like something like that is happening now, and you wonder if it'll ever get documented, right? Like these stories traveling from voice to voice over 1,000 years. It's a tale for times. In European, well, technically Mediterranean history. Absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. What do you think? Let me know. And if you'd like to join my blog and support the channel, it's www.subscribestar.com/MilahanArchive. Hope to see you there.